The House of Mystery presents Inside Writing, the radio show where authors discuss their writing process in all genres.
It's 9 o'clock and you are back in the House of Mystery, of course. Where else would you be? I'm Al Warren, and of course, we're doing Jack the Ripper, so we've got Mr. Michael Hawley here.
Hello, Al. How you doing?
Well, I'm doing good. Are you still sober, or are we got a problem here?
Well, yes, I am sober as far as you know. And then that's all that counts, right?
You're not going to start going all weird, are you, and start screaming and swearing again? Right? Yeah.
Yes, but at least you can edit that part out.
Well, I couldn't yesterday. I was embarrassing yesterday. I made our guest cry. I mean.
Well, they deserve it. So, but good news is we have a really neat guide today, though.
Yeah, it sounds interesting. And you, I heard you bored him to tears in L.A., so I guess, it's...
Oh, yeah. Both of us are on the same documentary coming up in April. So we got we're both couple of the experts. So
on a UFO show?
At dinner. Well, almost. It's another Jack the Ripper, but
that'll be interesting. That'll be good to see, so I can kind of record it and make clippings and make fun of you. So.
Oh yeah.
That'll be good.
So
well,
this looks good for me.
So we'll welcome to the show Mr. Matt Leyshon. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
Hello, Matt.
Hello, Mike. And if Mike said that he was sober, I would totally not take him on his word. So
no, sober. My God, he doesn't know what that is. You know.
And what's the?
Yeah, there you go. You see, he's starting to already, get there.
I think it's called a connoisseur of craft beers. Is what I prefer to say.
Craft beer is not connoisseur.
Well, I'm glad to hear about Jack the Ripper and not Jack Daniels. So I'm just.
Well,
there you are.
What he's thinking now because it's low carb. He just want to put on weight.
Or Jack is ripped. Yeah. So that's kind of.
Jack rips it really good. Okay, well, so this is interesting. We've had a lot of Jack the Ripper guests on before, people that have written books and done research and stuff like this. Now, your book is called Jack the Ripper Live and Uncut. But in this book, so if I got this right, this is a fiction book, right?
Correct.
Okay. So what brought you into the world where you decided that you're going to write a fiction story around the Jack the Ripper killings?
Well, that's almost a story in itself. I have had a long affinity with the case. I've always been interested in it since late high school. And on the flip side of that, I've had many people tell me that I should write. So I finally got the kick in the pants that I needed. I attended a masterclass hosted by James Patterson, and for the class, there was a competition, well, for anyone who did his masterclass, but you could submit a hook, synopsis, and sample chapter for a story, and the first prize was collaborating with James Patterson on a book. And I started thinking about different ideas for a story to write, and the Ripper came to mind. And I was thinking about the case, and I just thought, you know what, you're not going to solve it unless you're there. And that inspired the whole, literally the backbone of the entire story of incorporating time travel and placing my main character there as an eyewitness. So I wrote my sample chapter, and it was actually chapter 37 in the book. And I wanted to see how the concept played out and whether I felt comfortable writing it. And I had two other ideas for stories. And I wound up submitting a different one to Patterson because Patterson's not really a non-fiction guy. But the more I thought about this story, the more I really wanted to write it. It was the sample chapter that was the easiest to write and the most enjoyable. And I already started doing further research to try and formulate the outline that I wanted for my story. And when I found out that I didn't win James Patterson's competition, I was very happy because if anything, I got to work on the novel that I really wanted to work on. It had become a pet project. So from there, I began writing, and it all just started from there. But the masterclass from Patterson was the catalyst to get me finally writing a novel. But I'd had a long interest in the case, so I thought I could tell a Ripper tale that did the case and the time the appropriate justice. I love to leave every chapter with a reason to continue reading. I like to write like that, but if anything, I probably learnt that from his masterclass and from him as well. And you can actually tell him that something that he's said that has always stayed with me, whereas he had said, when you tell someone about a story that you have or show someone a piece of your writing, if someone says, oh, well, that's good, that's not the answer you want. The answer that you want is, I would like to hear more, or I would like to read more. That really resonated with me. I wanted to definitely tell a story that had that type of element in it consistently. So as soon as we get into the book and get going, you're just on this roller coaster that's not letting up. So I do have him to thank for that. And he also taught me the importance of an outline. I never outlined a story before, and the one time I tried to write a novel, I didn't even come close to finishing it. I got about 50 pages in, and I only wanted to write the good stuff. And I had no outline, and thanks to Patterson's class, I learned the value in that. But also for a book like Live and Uncut, where there's so much research in it, and some particular scenes or moments, like let's just say the Elizabeth Stride murder, for example. I would research it and not be writing it necessarily for another 6 months. So it's important to embed a lot of that research in my outline. So when the time came to write that chapter and place my reader at Duffield's Yard, I had so much of that content there in my outline. So it saved me a lot of time in terms of preparation to put myself there again to write it.
So Matt, when I was reading it, I did notice that your chapters are short, which I actually liked. You had a lot of them. But one of the things I remember when I was writing my fiction novel, my editor said that, for historical fiction, even though it's fiction, you better have your facts right, and why I say that is because my publisher had asked me to edit one of those New York Times top 10 bestsellers, and it was a fiction novel on Jack the Ripper, and the author made a number of mistakes, and it just drove me batty.
Yes.
So the nice thing about this one, Matt, is that you could see that you had done excruciating detailed research.
Thank you.
That you were so accurate on that. So, which is one of the reasons why you're going to be one of the experts on an upcoming History Channel episode. But
Thank you. Yeah, I know the book you speak of. It came out about 3 months after I finished Life and Uncut and was starting edits, and I thought, damn, because there hadn't really been a mainstream bestseller or movie for the Ripper in a long time, and that came out, and that's fine. But as part of my research, it wasn't just about the case itself. The initial research I did was on Ripper fiction. I brought up a lot of books on Amazon and IMDb and movies on IMDb, but more so the books. And I looked at what was, if it got a good review, why did people like it? If it got a bad review, why did people hate it? And I think in almost every case of a bad review, any 1 or 2 star reviews, the reason was accuracy. And my wife asked me when I first started writing it, she asked me about goals. And I said, well, one goal I have was I wanted to write a new kind of Ripper tale that new people to the case could easily fall into, that there's no catch-up required or required learning before reading the book. But also it had the level of detail that people that were deeper into Ripperology and had a greater knowledge of the case, that they could appreciate the detail that was put into the book, and therefore enjoy not only the amount of truth that is in it, but how it is weaved into the fiction and in a way kind of made responsible for each other. That was because what I was doing was I wouldn't classify my book as historical fiction. I would probably classify it as a thriller more than anything else. It's a book of many genres. It definitely has horror elements and sci-fi and so on. But when people ask me, I sort of say at the backbone of all of this is a thriller. Thus the shorter fast-paced chapters. So, I wanted to, in a way, write, a mainstream Ripper story that could still provide that, the appropriate education on the, Whitechapel at the time, but also, remain faithful to the case. It was important to me.
What I also liked is that you have pictures and pictures and images in your chapters, and I wasn't prepared for that for a fiction novel, but it was like very appropriate, especially when at the beginning when these were clues for your protagonist to figure it out.
Yeah, I hope that some of that survives the editorial process, because currently, what you read was the self-published iteration of the story. It's currently going out on submission to publishing houses. So, every image was vetted, or, personally created, like the map of Miller's Court and more or less the census listing everybody in it. I based that on other information I had, but I drew the whole thing myself. And the scrumpled up piece of paper with the suspects written on it, I actually, typed that onto a piece of paper and then scrunched it up myself and scanned it. So, I wanted to add a little bit of that in there. Like I said, I don't know how much of it's going to survive, but I remember reaching out to Philip Hutchinson just after the reading, going through, completing the book and making sure I had, copyrights on. I wasn't violating anything. And there was a couple of images where he suggested to, give people props for the image I used and so on. And he was very helpful in that regard. I've always appreciated that.
This is really the true scene of the Jack the Ripper murders. Like, this is all very true to life. Like, it's set in the right locations, and the murders are the exact murders, but you've sort of put a fictional character, investigative reporter, I believe, on the case.
Yeah, correct. The one thing I wanted to really, basically when I sat down and looked at this, I thought, well, my story's going to involve time travel and it's going to involve Jack the Ripper, and they're both things that have been well-trodden ground in fiction. So I wanted to, you've got to be unique. You've got to offer something fresh when you're using tropes that are as popular as those. So I think, my story creates a very unique form of time travel. And it places my main character, my investigative reporter, Carl Axford, in Whitechapel. But he has the freedom of, somebody like, Patrick Swayze in Ghost. He can go anywhere. He can go through walls and doors and see anything and not be detected. And I thought, I like this because if he was a live character, he's got to look around the corner, a street corner or something like that. There has to be some distance. Whereas, with this type of time travel projection, as I call it, with projection created, it gives him a limitless view and on any vantage point he wants. So I can take my reader as close as they want to get. And I don't want to gross people out either. But I do want people to be scared. Absolutely. These were terrifying what happened, and, I wanted to place them a lot closer than anything that's ever put in there before.
How'd you come up with the character Carl Axford? Like, where does that come from for you? And how much of yourself is in that character? Oh yeah,
Carl Axford and I totally live vicariously through each other. There's some things that I put in the book about Axford in both books. I wrote a sequel, and there's a lot of characteristics that we have in common. I originally wanted to be a journalist late in high school, but then an IT career came calling, and I just thought that might be a little bit more flexible in terms of where society's going to head, where technology's going to head. Plus, I hate editing. And here I am, 30 years later, I still hate editing.
Are you saying you consider yourself sarcastic, like your protagonist here?
No, I'm not sarcastic at all, Mike. No, even the luggage story at the airport where I introduce him, I've gone through something like that. I actually saw somebody with that luggage. I didn't have the courage to say the line that he said, but but it's, that little musing, that observation of his is something I've made myself. There's definitely some similarities, but I mean, he is his own man. I mean, I've got to give him his own identity in that regard. But I know one thing that I've done, and people have found it interesting. Some people have liked it, some people haven't. But I'm not very descriptive of physically what he looks like. So, in a way, Carl Axford's what you want him to be. And I remember I posted on a Facebook group of what age did you think Carl was? And I got everything from 21. Some people said late 40s. And to me, Carl's right in the middle of that. He's about 30. He's 30 years old, 31. So, he's, I guess, a younger version of myself. And he's not like me. He's like a younger version of me. I wrote, actually, as part of my agent's notes, I rewrote a chapter about a week ago with Axford in it. And it was the first time I wrote anything with Axford for nearly 2 years. And I got to say, it was just like putting a comfy pair of slippers on. I just love writing the guy. I try to present him as a likable character, although I think I don't think he's that likable at the start, but I think he's someone that grows on you and you wind up rooting for him in the end.
Right. That's when he first made that comment to that lady at the airport, I thought, I'm not sure if I'm going to like this guy.
And that's it. I know it's a sort of a polarizing moment where some people would go, oh, yes, oh, she had that coming. And then there's other people, they'll be like, well, that's a bit forward, saying something like that. So, I love writing all the characters in these stories, and the sequel actually introduced some other really special characters, again, that I just love writing. But writing a second story is also great because you just have that feel of getting the band back together almost the entire time that you're writing the story. So, I love Axford. I've had great feedback about him, and I really hope that I can write the full series that I do intend to regarding this guy, because there is a character evolution. Like this is one of those series where there is interlacing between the stories, and my character does go on a development arc. He's not like a cutout character, among stories. And so, he'll age. He will, he also in the second book suffers PTSD from the Ripper case. I really wanted to I really wanted to humanize the experience that he has. People are surprised in the second book that the very first story has him in a group therapy get together. So an assembly of guys that have trouble coping with whatever trauma they have, and he's one of the people there. Yeah, so that people were very surprised because he's a confident character, but I wanted to humanize what he goes through. I don't like time travel stories that are like, oops, we messed up, but hey, everyone's all right, and history's not really bumped that much as a result. I wanted this to come with consequences. There is an emotional toll, for what he had to endure and what he had to witness. That would be a lot for anybody, I think. And I didn't get to really delve into that in the book, like post-case. I did a little bit during the case, but post-case, not so much, but I do in the second book.
Well, how do you experience your character then? How do you experience Carl Axford? Do you hear his voice in your head, or do you see him, or how does that work for you?
Sometimes. Yeah, I sometimes feel Carl's a guy I'd love to just sit down and have a beer with. I think he would be good company, and he'd be smart company. But I don't think he'd be too cocky. I do definitely try to put myself in his shoes when I write these things. So, in a way it's, writing it as if I'm there myself. And in a way you have to. You have to put yourself in your MC's place and be able to, feel what they feel in that moment. And usually when it came to some of the harder chapters to write, not harder in terms of professionally, but just like the emotional chapters, I guess, when it came to writing the chapters that featured murders, for example, I would sort of step back from the laptop for a bit and just think about things and play out what I had in mind for that chapter or that scene. And then I would, then I'd get to the typewriter and go. But no, a lot of chapters for Axford, I would play out in my own head first. And in a way, I would put myself in his place and I'd be thinking, well, how would I feel if I was, witnessing this or experiencing that?
Does that ever kind of make you feel a little bit vulnerable when you share a lot of your own feelings in a book where anybody can read, and not only can anybody just pick it up and read it, but they can share what they think of it or maybe something that's important to you, and they could say something really mean online nowadays?
Sure. Well, there's always going to be haters. I was definitely resigned to that when I wrote the book. Ironically, I haven't really had any. I think the only hater I ever had dissed on me because I don't live in London. Apparently, I'm not qualified to write the story because I don't live in London.
That's Michael. Don't worry about him.
Well, but I said it privately. I didn't know you knew I said that. What's going on here?
It's fair enough to say that, but in a way it's not, because, especially because a lot of the murder sites are now very different. So, seeing Mitre Square, for example, these days is not going to, bring me into writing Mitre Square in 1888 at all. So, when you're writing something in a different era, I've never subscribed to you have to live there or you should have been there kind of thing. If your research is good enough, for example, when my book was reviewed by the Whitechapel Society and from Ripperologist magazine, the two people from it had assumed I did live in London, and the other asked the question in an interview with me. They said, "Well, you've obviously spent a lot of time in London to research and write this book." And I shook my head and I said, "I'm sorry, I have never been to London before. I've never spent a single day there. But thankfully, with the internet and the tools that we have, I was able to research it thoroughly enough to, I believe to, put forward a convincing, story in that regard." But I am conscious of some of the things that I put in my story, sort of coming back to that. I don't want, but by the same token, I don't want to, sail on the course of political correctness and have that change my own voice in terms of the stories I want to tell. I don't think anything I put in the story is controversial in any way. But if somebody, doesn't like it, obviously, I welcome the dialogue. I would never say to someone, don't, if you hate my book, I don't want to hear from you, because you fail to want to become a better writer, I think. As I said, you don't have to write to the masses, but, there's things that, you should become mindful of. But thankfully, I haven't really had any hate or disdain for the story that I told with Axford there.
So when you did your research for this, not only for the timing of in the late 1800s in London and getting the let's say the attitudes of people and the expressions and how they dressed, and you kind of get the whole atmosphere. Did you also look to other Ripper writers that were in the true crime area and kind of their theories of who they thought it would be and how the murders happened and stuff? Did you go through that whole series as well, or did you avoid those?
I have a ton of books in terms for research for the area for the case itself. I have many books that don't even involve the Ripper, but they're about the conditions in the East End, like People of the Abyss by Jack London. I read that, and I expanded my research out to some of the best Ripperologists that are around and their material. I didn't really talk to many or any about it, partially because I think Ripper fiction doesn't have the same traction as, if I told them, hey, I'm writing a book about Aaron Kosminski as a suspect, and I need your take on that. Well, firstly, if it's someone that doesn't think that it's him, then all they're going to do is tell me why it's not. So, no, I didn't, on account that, like I said, I was sort of a fiction writer trying to carve my way out. But if I did have questions on some things, there were people I went to. And some people were extremely helpful. Some people were not. None in ripperology. I do want to clarify that. Anybody that I approached in ripperology was very helpful. Now, the one person I truly wasn't helpful at all was the leading autobiographer of the Beatles. As you know, there's a couple of chapters that actually feature the Beatles in my book. That the stuff that I got from him wasn't very helpful at all. I can actually say that I got more help from a busker than I did than the Beatles' leading biographer. Research can take you to some strange places, so. And my book did for me. There's almost a book behind the book in terms of some of the research and stories.
Did you, in your head, ahead of time, when you were writing this, kind of know how it was going to end or know who the Ripper was going to be in your mind? Or did that just not matter to you?
Oh, no, it totally mattered. For me, I wanted to have, as I mentioned, formulate that outline, a lot of it before I even got started, because, and part of that is obviously presenting whatever theory I wanted to have on who the Ripper was, and then how they got away with it, all those sorts of things. And I, listed a lot of questions for myself like that, there's so many grey areas in the case, and you've got to wonder, well, how can I have a plot that envelops this? So my first port of call was trying to establish, what my Ripper theory was going to be, whether I wanted it to follow something, that was common. I think I vowed not to involve a royal or Freemason conspiracy, because that's what everybody does. But I did want to bring into the spotlight, people that are connected to this case that deserve, probably a greater spotlight than the royal conspiracy. And I wanted to bring up people that were interesting, worth talking about. And I remember a friend asking me, I'd written about 60% of the book, and he said to me, do you believe your theory on who Jack the Ripper is? I said, no. And he said, why not? I said, because it's a work of fiction. If I was writing a textbook, I don't get the same liberties if I'm writing a textbook. I said, but I'm not. I'm writing, a Ripper tale. I want to make it interesting. And this was the kind of plot that I came out with. And, what I described was I had several different beats of the plot that I had in terms of who it was and other notions. But the thing that strung it together was the Goulston Street graffito. And I worked on how I was going to involve that in the story. And I'm not going to give any spoilers. I worked on that for 2.5 weeks alone, just coming up with how it was going to fit and how it was going to be a crucial part of the case that Axford has to solve. Revealing, the problems that he's up against other than just identifying the Ripper.
You even have a couple of suspects kind of knowing each other there.
Yes. Yeah, I wanted to do that too, because the East End's it's sort of a large place, but in a way not. Everyone says it's a small world. But also, especially given the origins of some of the characters, some characters are of similar background. So I wanted to try and establish ways of, having that interconnectivity, not just, people are connected by the Freemasons. There's other ways that we can bring people together in a story. And, the way I did it was fictional, but very rational. So, I wanted to create a community for that supported, new immigrants into London. And that's how two of my characters met, in the story. But where they met was very real. Where they would go after every meeting was very real. And that was taking some plot beats and putting that together, and then trying to work out how to string it together. And when I had that eureka moment where I did the then and now as to where they would go after the synagogue and what that place is today, when I saw the name of it, I just lit up and said, okay, I have to make this fit. This is a really, it's plausible, but also I thought an intelligent way of making it fit.
Very crafty. Yes.
Thank you. Well, to let you know, I guess this is a little bit of a spoiler. When David Green from Ripologist magazine was reading it, he reached out to me and told me that he was loving the book, but he, once learning that the Gorston Street Graffito was an anagram, he was trying to work it out prior, because apparently he's an anagram champion, an anagram king. And I thought, well, good luck. I didn't think he would. And he did. When he finally got to it, he told me it was anagram bliss. He loved it.
Did you use a lot of the actual evidence, like, that was brought up and it's been talked about on movies and books and stuff, like the Ripper letters and things like that? Did you use all that?
Yeah, I used the Dear Boss letter, probably not as intricately as it probably could have. But again, I sort of worked with what I would consider a great parameter in the case, and that is there was another letter that's affectionately referred to as the threatening letter. And nobody has, I don't think anyone's sure whether it was written by the Ripper or not. I think it was assumed it wasn't, only on account of, we still don't know who the recipient of the threatening letter was, who it was addressed to. So I wanted to work that into my story. When I read the contents of that, I thought, oh, that's great. I can really work that into my, again, making it responsible for the fiction and the fiction responsible for fact. And when I worked the threatening letter in, because anything that's grey area in the Ripper case, I saw as fair game. Because if you say, well, it's this, no one can really tell you it's not because it's not proven. But anything that's obviously black and white, I tried to adhere to. But yeah, I took the threatening letter and went to town with that. I made sure that it featured. But also, working with other things like the Maybrick Diary and the Maybrick Watch. But the Gorston Street Graffito, the piece of Catherine Eddowes' apron that was torn off and left at the side of the. Yeah, I wanted to include those type of things. Again, I really like when you're doing research and you find ways that you can braid it into the story you're telling, and as I mentioned, make the fact responsible for the fiction, like making them, just intertwined and responsible for each other. I think there's just very high reward in that, and the more you can do it, the better. It's not a case of intertwining like 3 or 4 things about the case in the whole story. There's a whole lot there. I remember a reader who loves the case, and she said to me, after about 2/3 of the way through the book, she just began to forget what was truth anymore. And I said, well, that's what I like to hear. So, I take great pride in trying to include as much as I can for the Ripperologists and the people that are synonymous with the case, but also people that are new. It's important they learn these things too. A lot of people know about the Dear Boss letter. That's a slam dunk when it comes to discussing evidence about the case, but hardly anybody's ever heard of the threatening letter. And when I did compare handwriting on those, they are pretty similar. So I thought it was a liberty I could take and include it in my story.
Well, what's nice about that also, 2 things. One is that your story doesn't get bogged down by history. I mean, you really do a great job at that. But also, 2018, the Ripper community gave you Jack Ripper Fiction Book of the Year. So that's
they did. Thank you. Well, you and I are what I refer to as class of 2018, because that year you won right. for your Tumblety book, Suspect, and.
So, Al, did you see how I sucked him into this? Tell everybody how well I did.
Oh, yeah. I so could have made this question all about me, but no, Mike. I know. I always feel compelled to mention that you won the much more illustrious nonfiction volume. But yes, I had good competition that year. I had some brilliant books that I was up against.
You did.
I was completely, flattered, and without sounding cliche, it was the dream come true. As I mentioned, I wanted to write something that Ripperology would like, and not cast out like the story that you were asked to review, Mike. So, I wanted something that was truly mainstream, but it did satisfy whatever level of knowledge you have on the case. So, to receive that award, I display it proudly in my house. It's one of the first things you see when you walk in, and it's always meant a lot to me, and still does.
It was kind of strange, Matt, when we were in Los Angeles together. You were carrying that with you everywhere. I didn't get that part, though.
Well, I had to check it in. I couldn't take it on the flight because it is sharp at one end, and so it was considered lethal. But one story I will tell, which is true. I heard that I had it, and it was in the mail and everything like that. I was just climbing the walls, and it was the first and only time that I know of when I missed the delivery, and therefore it went back to the post office. So I drove to the post office to get it, and they didn't have it yet because the truck was still out, and I was just so impatient. I just wanted that moment of just having it in my hands. That moment, as you know it, I mean, and you'd had that already. You'd already posted it like 2 days ago. Oh yeah, here I am. So no, that I think just made me even more anxious. It's something that meant a lot to me. So when the voting and all that was being put forward, I was monitoring that. I cared. I really wanted to. I wanted to take it out. I was flattered that I got to this point in the first place. But once you see that your story has the potential for that type of appreciation, especially from some people whose books I've bought and read as part of research, voting for my story, I mean, that's surreal. It really is. It's something that I had not even conceived when I first started writing this book. So, it was... I was just on cloud nine and still am to a degree, because it's something that can never be taken from me, and it's something I'll always have. And unfortunately, it came just after the book was taken out of publication because of its pursuit for mainstream. And I remember even asking at the time, I said, my book's not published anymore. This is a posthumous award for a book. Are you sure you want it to be, to still be included? But no, I was assured that it was published that year. People have read it that year, and in a way, it's part of the brag for me. It's what makes it more amazing. It was only out for 6 months of that year, but it made quite an impact. It's something that I'll never forget.
Did you get arrested for chasing the postal driver down in his truck?
You went postal.
Right, exactly. I was waiting for that. I really was. It's not surprising that you put it out there, Mike. No, I did not. But it had
away with it.
The thought had occurred to me. I thought of stalking the truck like Wile E. Coyote style. Yeah. And bringing the truck down and then trying to get my award that way. But no, I patiently waited until the next morning, but I turned up to the post office 5 minutes after it opened because I wanted my damn award. So, I really was like super, excited. And if this goes mainstream and more happens to it, that's great. But I don't think anything will, replace this, because I tell writers that, from my former agency and my current, people I know now, that there's a thing called imposter syndrome, where where a writer feels that they don't have it, or they can't write or tell good enough stories. And that brief time that I was self-published, with the reception I received and award and everything like that, I don't get imposter syndrome at all. If an editor passes on my book, I don't care. That's the way it is. I had one editor who I went extremely close with, and it was a shame because he was the number one draft pick and for good reason. He edits like some of the best thrillers and mysteries out there. But because of the sci-fi and speculative elements, he couldn't sign it. But he said if he didn't have those, he would have. But the self-published part and feedback from people I'd never met before who had read my book, feedback from Riverology, feedback from, around everywhere. It just made me feel like, okay, I can tell stories. I should stick with this. And the award is just like at the very forefront of that belief.
So, Matt, the question is, like, both Al and I, we're nonfiction to the core. Right. Have you ever, because you did research so much, have you ever thought about doing nonfiction, or are you going to stick with the fiction?
Sticking with the fiction because I'm a fiction writer. As I mentioned, I wrote a sequel, which is not related to the Ripper at all. But there is, and I also wrote a fantasy based whodunit. So Agatha Christie meets Game of Thrones. And again, I think at my core, I like to tell thrilling stories in a way, but I get enjoyment out of those. I haven't really given much credence to writing nonfiction. To be honest, I appreciate writers who do it, who take that investment in time and effort to present research and facts. The reason why I like your book is because you're not putting Tumblety as the man. He's not the Ripper. You're basically presenting what you've learnt about him and therefore what we need to learn about him and other suspect books that are out there that are like that. So, I totally, appreciate that side of it. But no, I like, if the History Channel comes calling, sure, I'll appear on it, but no, I don't think I would write the nonfiction. I have thought of another idea for another Ripper fiction story, but it's one of about 14 ideas for stories that I have right now, and it's probably about 9th on my list. So I don't think I'll be getting to it anytime soon, not unless I can, God forbid, make an actual career out of this. That would be nice. But I did have an idea for another Ripper fiction. I would love to write another Ripper fiction, but not using the foundation that I had with Live and Uncut. This would be a totally different story, a different perspective, and also and probably more closer to non-fiction on account that the main character was set in the time during 1888. So it's not a current or present day person going back to experience this.
Make sure you read my next book first.
No one's going to read your book. I think you have a certain amount of freedom doing it your way, like
that's
doing
true.
Historical fiction in a sense, because you can take all the things you do or we know in general for around a scene, a crime, a time. You can put all that in there. It can be very real, but you can layer it with a character or two or whatever it takes. And you have a freedom with that, like with what Mike writes and even myself. It's it is what it is. Our characters have done what they've done, and that's it. But you can actually weave your own story in amongst the true story. In
terms of storytelling, absolutely. But I also think, ironically, nonfiction books or stories come under greater scrutiny because of the fact checking. With fiction, there's some fact checking, as I mentioned. Some people don't like inaccuracies, but the writer can always lean back on and say, hey, it's a work of fiction. I try not to do that. I mean, obviously I can, but you're right. I get that creative license to take this in different places to what a nonfiction writer could. But as I mentioned, because Ripperology, is an industry where facts are just so important, and just one thing that's not inaccurate, but all of a sudden because it's written down and it's there, it's something that's just going to come back again and again and again, and it frustrates people because they know it's not true, and they just have to keep arguing the provenance of some things that people believe, this person was the Ripper, or this piece of evidence is the smoking gun we're all after. It's it's a much hard, to me, it's a double-edged sword, because in non-fiction, I think you come under greater scrutiny. But as a fiction writer, you're sort of met by, you're kind of on the outer, because, this is a group or a community that's driven by facts, and you tell people, hey, I wrote a fiction book, it's sort of the roll of the eyes, and because, the Ripper isn't always represented well in fiction. I always refer to it as taking Jack's name in vain. Some people, stick the Ripper on a book because it's it's got a better chance of selling if his name's in it. I didn't want to do that. I want, even though I called the book Jack the Ripper Live and Uncut, but that's actually a misunderstanding of the algorithms of Amazon and the use of keywords. I thought I needed that in the title for people to look it up. So my bad. And I always refer to the story as Live and Uncut. I don't refer to it as Jack the Ripper Live and Uncut. So much of it is driven by the pursuit or thirst or hunger of facts. And you tell someone you wrote a fiction story, people are going to feel like, well, they're not really going to learn anything from it. And I hope my book's a little different in that regard, because it is fiction, but there's a lot to take away from it. And one thing I received praise on was referring to the dock fires in London, the night of Polly Nichols' murder. A lot of people said, well, they knew very little about the dock fires, or they hadn't heard about the dock fires, or they heard about them and didn't know it was the same night. So, it comes back to that goal I had. I wanted something that, that could educate someone, even if they're experienced, or if they're experienced, they at least saw a lot of this as not so much in jokes, but, references that the experts get, kind of thing.
Right, those dock fires made the evening look like a glow, like they're from
hell. Right, exactly. And ironically, the chapter that I rewrote last week involved the dock fires. So, I really enjoyed writing it, because my agent told me that, it was a bit of an info dump. She liked the inclusion of the dock fires, but she wanted me to change the story to either some kind of flashback or something where Axford learns about the dock fires and then translate and then place him back right in the thick of it. And I thought, so I did. I rewrote this chapter. So a lot of the info dump is actually coming from a professor giving a lecture, and Axford is watching it, online. And so then it becomes this little personal, wager of his, where he wants to now prove the professor wrong and see that whether the dock fires were lit by the Ripper or not. So it was cool.
How coincidental that I found out that, true story, when Tumbly was on his deathbed, that area, he lit that on fire.
Oh, God.
I'm telling you, he did. It's amazing.
Yeah, he could be pinned for the dock fires, if not the murders one.
There you go.
Yeah, see,
it's part of
he did something. So someone picks up the book. They pick up Live and Uncut, and they read it. At the end of it, was there something you hope that they took away from the book?
As a thriller writer, priority one is I hope my reader was entertained. And that's probably sounds a little superficial, but as a thriller writer, that is the end game in what you write. I hoped if it was somebody that was new to all this, that they came away not only thinking about the Ripper a little more, but also they were exposed to people and evidence in the case that's not as prominent as what you see in TV shows or movies, or other, books that represent the case. I wanted to offer some new things or education on people or things that they might not have seen before. And I hope that that's realized. But also I like to place the notion, like Limbo, I think, is a great concept. I like the idea of, being sent to somewhere and be, as I mentioned, the original question I put in my head was the notion was the only way we'll ever know is if we're there. And so I wanted to put a guy there and then have people think about other cases as well. That's why the last chapter almost screams out that there's going to be a sequel, because, Jen, offers up, some dates or places where she wants to go on holiday, and Axford's just dismissing it all immediately. But, those name and dates are significant. One of them is the death of Tupac. One of them is the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. One of them is the assassination of Kennedy. So, I want people thinking, this is a cool idea. I'd love to see how this would play out in other cases or other events in history, for sure.
You mean Tupac's dead?
I didn't say that. I said the date. Okay, no, I did say his death. Tupac's, in parentheses, alleged death. Ironically, my second book has that in it.
There you go. See, now we know.
Yeah, a very brief synopsis. The second one involves the deaths of about six musicians that all their deaths have been deemed accidental or suspicious, and I link them all to a common cause and offer up a present day target. So that's where I'm headed in book 3. But I have 5 stories completely mapped out. I literally know the last chapter of my last story and how it's all going to end. So as I mentioned, I've written 2, but I started writing the 3rd, but then I realized I needed to diversify. I couldn't just put all my eggs in one basket. So I wrote Murder Between Realms, which was my fantasy-based whodunit. And that's also about to be shopped out as well with this. We're waiting at the moment. Obviously, I'm making some changes as per my agent notes, but also once the History Channel show drops, which looks like it might be in a couple of weeks now, Mike, we'll see.
Right, probably the first or second week of April, my guess.
Yeah, I agree. Because I saw the latest one that's coming out in next week is The Somerton Man. And I haven't said this to anybody yet, but at the end of my recording with the History Channel, I had some time left, and being of Australian origin, Jeff started asking me a few questions about The Somerton Man.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and after a few questions, I just looked at him and said, "Is the camera still rolling?" And he nodded with a smile, and so I can't guarantee that I'm going to be.
Oh, that'd be cool.
It would be amazing, but I can't. I mean, I haven't put it on social media or anything because it's not a guarantee. The Ripper episode is a guarantee. The Somerton Man not so much, but next week I'll definitely be watching. And
yes,
and if my ugly mug comes on the screen for a few seconds, and I'll be letting everyone know that if you want to catch Matt Leyshon for 10 seconds out of an hour show, tune into Lawrence and History's Greatest Mysteries for the Somerton Man episode.
So how do people get a hold of you? Like, what do you like to do? Do you like to interact on social media with readers, or do you have a website? Let's give out your information.
I appreciate that. I do. I definitely love engaging with readers. A lot of people will say, they've, reached out to me, after reading the story, and I stay in contact with people, and some people I even go back to proofread, new stuff that I write. So, some people come near and dear. So, I am on Facebook. There is Matt Leyshon. Leyshon. There is a Matthew Leyshon as well, but that's probably more my personal one. The Matt Leyshon is supposed to be my writer one, but I do put some personal there too. I'm on Twitter a lot. My Twitter handle is at mleyshonauth, AUTH at the end. I'm on Twitter as well. I'm on Instagram, but I've only ever posted twice on Instagram, so I will barely give that out, but my website is www.matt-leyshon.com. And as I mentioned, the book is out of publication, unfortunately, but if people do reach out to me, I'm still inclined to send somebody a PDF copy of it, because I still like to gain readership and seek further opinions as well from readers. Until I'm signed, I'm not bound by anything to not be able to share it with people who want to read it. So I welcome anyone who would want to.
Great. We'll have that up on our website as well, so people can find you with one click. make it easy
I appreciate
for them.
that.
And I'll tell you, it's been a great conversation, and good luck in the future with all this. So,
thank you so much. I've had a great time talking with you guys. I'm sure I could easily go for another 2 or 3 hours, but
yeah,
what time we've had, I've really enjoyed it, and I love the questions as well.
Yeah, great speaking with you, Matt. Great speaking with you.
Yes, great catching up with you too, Mike.
So the book is called Live and Uncut, Jack the Ripper, and the author is Mr. Matt Leyshon. Thank you for being here.
To find out more about our show, guests, or to listen to past shows from our archive, please go to www.houseofmysteryradio.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.